Hi, everybody. We're just starting to let some people in, and we'll give that a minute or two.
I didn't guess.
And
What are you doing now?
I'm on a webinar.
Oh.
It's just being recorded.
we should ask people that are not our scheduled speakers to mute for the beginning of the session. When we get to Q&A, you can unmute. And you probably noticed that we're recording this, so consider that as you turn your cameras on or off. We will share on our YouTube and our website. So if your visual privacy matters, you might want the camera off. But we do like to see your faces if you're comfortable with that.
Daniel, I'm going to mute everyone, so you might have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah. We had a great number of registrants for this, so I think we'll have a good turnout coming in.
It looks like everybody that was in the waiting room is let in. So if you want to go ahead and get started, Daniel, I can just continue to let people in as it progresses.
Perfect. Great. So thank you all for coming. Welcome. This is a rare disease storytelling workshop. There may have been a little confusion because what we have done so often in the past is specifically rare disease filmmaking, video storytelling, and this is not that. So if you came for that, don't worry, because we have a link to a previous one where you can rewatch the visual storytelling, the video filmmaking storytelling sessions. And those are, just skipping ahead 1 second, on this URL, globalgenes.org/rarely told stories, you will find the video making lesson version of how to tell your rare disease story. But today is across much greater variety of media, including in-person storytelling and blogs and articles and podcasts. I'm thrilled because the speakers are all people that have shaped or been an early part of my own storytelling, sort of going in reverse order, what you see on the screen. The first time I ever told my son Lucas had a rare disease called Menkes syndrome. The first time I ever told a story about our experience was on The Mighty, and got to know Mike Porath through that. And that was all sort of email correspondence until Global Genes Summit in 2015. And then I got to meet Mike in person, and we've stayed in touch and been friends and collaborators since. And the first time I led a workshop like this on storytelling was Global Genes partnered with EveryLife Foundation. And at that time, the wonderful Mary Morlino was working at EveryLife, and the two of us led a storytelling workshop. And now Stephanie is here from that group. And not to spoil her presentation, but I had been familiar with part of what she'll talk about is the Rare Artist Initiative. And I'd been familiar with that, but until this February, when I experienced it in person, I didn't realize what a great conversation starter that is, having your visual artwork of your rare disease as a starting point, as a door opener. And Jennifer Siedman is here from Courageous Parents Network. And in addition to being a friend and collaborator, she was my editor when I was a blogger in residence for Courageous Parents Network. So you're in great hands with all of these speakers for sure. I may not have mentioned my title, if that matters. At Global Genes, I'm the Director of Community Engagement. And among the things I do is put together programs like this for storytelling to increase your advocacy abilities in the way you tell your story. And I won't be speaking long because each of these guest contributors has a lot of great stuff to say. At the end, of course, we'll try to get to Q&A as much as we can. You can come off mute for that and speak aloud, or you could enter in the chat if you prefer. This first URL is a great collection we put together of not only Global Genes resources, but some others, including Courageous Parents Network and EveryLife's resources on storytelling are all listed there. And we're going to get to a screen at the end of several resources from each of the contributors. I will just say before we dive into Stephanie that we may cover some of these things. They are also covered in that previous example, which was the storytelling and video workshop. Things like what part of your story are you going to tell, because you probably can't tell all of it. The benefits of storytelling, they accrue to both you, the storyteller, and your audience, and not everyone always thinks about that. But even if you put your story in a desk drawer and never showed anybody, it would still have benefits. You'll probably hear those type of things from other people today too. And also, I think so many of us, I was a rare dad, and we'll hear at a event, a conference, or a session like this, we'll be asked, what is your why? And that's a great way to get into your story. But I think I was, and a lot of people are tempted to take their why and turn it into their who. So my who is my son, Lucas. And of course, he's the reason I care about rare disease. But I would just caution you that your who story tends to be very big. You might want to tell the whole life story of the person affected by the rare disease. And your why story should probably be a little more focused and targeted. And we may be getting into more of that with the other speakers. And if not, we can certainly get to it in the Q&A. And with that, I want to hand things over to Stephanie Riordan to start. And she'll be telling us, among other things, about their Rare Artist program. Stephanie?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel. My name is Stephanie Riordan. I am the Director of Patient Programs with the EveryLife Foundation for Rare Diseases. Similar to Global Genes, we are an umbrella organization for rare diseases. As part of my role with the patient programs is overseeing the Rare Artist program, which is a unique program. It was established in 2010, and it really allows those impacted by rare diseases to be able to tell their story through visual art. And last year we added poetry for our first year, and powerful artist statements. I know Daniel kind of asked a prompting question about your who and your why, but I kind of want everybody to take a step back. Oh, I have a question for you all as well. Think about the time that you got diagnosed or a loved one got diagnosed with a rare disease, and when you navigated a really difficult aspect of your illness. Maybe you couldn't get access to a medication that you really needed. And how did that make you feel? So oftentimes in the rare disease space and in our rare disease journey, I have a rare disease myself. We hear these really big words and medical jargon that it's really hard to pronounce things and really take a step back and understand the emotional aspect and how this really impacts us. When we tell stories, oftentimes you may go to a friend or a loved one and you might include those really large words and medical jargon, and it might be hard for them to understand, but you and I might be talking the same language because we've been exposed to that rare disease language, that medical jargon the whole time. But art kind of allows you to take a step back and be able to express yourself and understand yourselves more on a personal and emotional level. I always tell the story. We had somebody join a webinar a couple of years ago, and she just started crying, and she said, I got diagnosed, and I've never really taken the time to understand, what does this mean for me emotionally? What does this mean for my story? I've just always been Google, appointments, doctors, big words. And so that's where the art comes in. And that's why it's so important. I'm sure everybody has heard the phrase, art, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And that 1,000 words directly translates into each and every one of our rare disease journeys. So the picture that you see on this screen right here is by Allie. Allie was a 2021 Rare Artist Awardee who painted the piece Intensity. Allie was frequently asked what it's like having a rare disease, and she had no words to be able to describe her experience with the rare disease. So she created this piece Intensity to be able to reflect that. So if you look deep on each of the aspects of the pictures, you can see a tear on the face, the darker colors that she picked, more of like a tornado, hurricane type aspect in the front. And Allie has actually used her story and her piece to advocate for rare diseases with meetings with legislators, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's a really exciting time for rare artists. Our next contest is kicking off very soon. It will be open from August 1st until September 13th, and that will be at rareartist.org. Anybody who enters Rare Artist will have the opportunity to be a finalist. We'll have 20 finalists, and they will participate in individual artist to advocate coaching with myself to be able to learn how to tell your story, how to use those artist statements to really build momentum and make a difference. Every year, our contest is open to anybody. So it could be somebody who has a rare disease. It could be somebody who is impacted by a rare disease. And in just a second, I'll be able to show you some examples, but awardees are invited to showcase their artwork on Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill, and also receive a cash prize. Next slide. And so here are some pictures from Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill. If you look at the picture on the left, this is Wes. Wes was a Rare Artist awardee 2 years ago. When Wes was going into meetings with his legislators, he actually wore a t-shirt with his art piece. His art piece is called Sprout. And so he was able to tell his story through art and say, you know, you're in a lot of meetings every day as a legislator, but I'm going to show you a visible piece of what it's like having my rare disease so you can remember me. And he has that memorable impact. And that moves directly over to our middle section. This might be somebody that you all recognize. This is Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. Senator Warren found out that Laura Romano was a Rare Artist awardee for her piece, Natural Representation. And Senator Warren was very impressed with the piece of the power of the messaging. That Laura's piece actually is on display in Senator Warren's office right now, which shows the impact of a visual art piece, of visual storytelling. Similarly, on the right, Sarah, who is in the green, is holding her piece. Sarah is from Alaska, and she was able to meet with her Alaskan representative and senator to be able to present their piece. Sarah's piece is called Window into the Soul. If you look really, really closely, I know it's tiny on your screens, but each pane of that window represents a different aspect of Sarah's rare disease journey. So at first it shows a bud blossoming, entangled in thorns. And then at the end, it shows the bloom actually blooming. And because she's been able to connect with the rare disease journey and has that power to share her voice, she feels like she has blossomed. Next slide. So how exactly do you tell your story through art? There is a concept called narrative medicine. And I have an excerpt here from a book from 1995. This was around when narrative medicine became very popular. When people tell their stories, they use it to make a sense of their suffering. They turn their diseases into stories and they find healing. So healing to make well, to restore health. Oftentimes there are different pillars of narrative medicine, the restitution illness narrative, which is anticipating that you're going to get better. There's the chaos illness narrative, which is, oh, this illness seems to go on forever. There's no end in sight. I am not going to be able to be the person that I am. But then there's the quest illness narrative. And this is what we really see a lot in Rare Artists. The quest illness narrative is really finding insight with your illness and how you can transform your illness from the means of the ill person or the diagnosis that you received and how you can create somebody new. I mentioned about Sarah and her artwork blossoming and blooming. You keep in mind that your illness remains within the lived experience of yourself, but it does not contain it at all. So how can you be able to display that and portray that in a manner that can say, I have my diagnosis, it does not define who I am. Grace on the right-hand side was at Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill this year, was one of our awardees for the piece Natural Representation, Daniel and Grace were able to connect quite a bit. So these pictures are actually from Daniel. Thank you for having them in there. But Grace, similar to Allie on the first slide, said, I don't know how to tell people about my rare disease. I don't know what it's like to be able to reflect that. And so Grace's piece that you can see has 3 heads. Grace said, I feel like I have 3 heads when I tell people about my rare disease. If you look below the ribs, you can see the ribs that are showing. That is a reflection of a surgery that Grace had that didn't go so well. The jellyfish around the outside really reflect that Grace feels like they live in kind of underwater in a bubble. So the imagery of each of these pieces really reflect Grace's journey. However, Grace is using that piece, using that quest illness narrative of this is the person I am. I'm not letting thy illness define me. I'm taking my art piece now to make a difference, to make an impact on the community. And so Grace met with legislators, as I mentioned, to be able to tell their story. Next slide. And as I mentioned, Rare Artists is open to anybody in the community. It does not necessarily have to be the patient themselves. So we're going to talk about caregivers in just a second. So to lead up to that, I want to show you one more art piece to start some inspiration if being involved in Rare Artist or telling your story through art is of interest. This is Gisela and Gisela's daughter, Noah. Noah was diagnosed through the Undiagnosed Diseases Network program, specifically at NIH. And Gisela has always said there's so many programs, there's so many support systems out there for the patient themselves. But as a caregiver, I have really struggled finding a way to tell my story and to voice what my experience has been like having a child with a rare disease. So Gisela created this painting that you see on the left. It's called Waiting, and it actually represents Noah. Noah is wearing a hospital gown, and in the hospital gown are actually DNA letters to be able to show the mutations in Noah's DNA. The flowers around the stump represent Noah's favorite flowers. There's a grasshopper that represents Noah's favorite animals. There's different signature representations to Shakespeare, who is Noah's favorite author. But Gisela said that Rare Artists gives her the platform for both the patients and caregivers through art to tell the story and go towards change. Rare Artists has inspired me to paint again, and I am very thankful. So just a great example of what it's like to be a caregiver that is able to share your story through art. If getting involved in Rare Artist or telling your story through art is something that you're interested in, Rare Artist actually has a webinar tomorrow at 2 p.m. About storytelling to hear directly from some of our artists to be able to talk about tools and accessibility techniques to really get out and use your story to make a difference. So that, if you're interested in registering, is at rareartist.org. And that's all I have. Thank you, Daniel.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And next is going to be Jennifer Siedman, and she's at Courageous Parents Network. So as the name implies, it caters to the parents of medically complex kids or kids that may have shorter lifespans. And there's an aspect of storytelling that you can see from the slide Jennifer is going to address. We sometimes hear the difference between a patient themselves telling their story and a patient who is young enough or unable to communicate themselves, and then it falls to the parent. And there's some tricky terrain to navigate there when you are speaking on behalf of your child, especially if that child may progress to more autonomy and more issues of their own privacy and things like that. But Jennifer is more expert at that than I am, I think. So Jennifer, introduce yourself and take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. So as Daniel said, I'm with Courageous Parents Network, which is an online nonprofit that provides digital resources to families caring for medically complex kids. And we do that through blogs and video interviews and sound stories and guides and learning pathways and all sorts of digital things that you can access 24/7. I'll be honest and tell you that the majority of the families who come to Courageous Parents generally have children who can't really speak for themselves. So That's not true of everyone who comes to Courageous Parents Network, but it is the majority. And it certainly was my own experience. So with a little background, my son Benjamin was diagnosed in 1996 with something called Sanfilippo syndrome, which is a neurologically based disorder, which is progressive in nature. So over time, he lost his skill set. And so I had to be a very big interpreter for my son, and we'll talk a little bit about that and what some of the pressures that it entails. I also just want to say that I loved so much of what Stephanie touched on, and certainly you'll hear a little bit of repeat here in what I'm going to say. And I'm so glad that you are highlighting sort of narrative medicine, because that is, we hear at CPN from a lot of clinicians, more and more important in understanding particularly children who can't represent themselves. But when Daniel asked me to speak on this topic, which I can't really claim to be an expert on, I immediately thought of this quote from this mom, Michelle, who's featured in one of our video interviews on Courageous Parents Network. And I thought of it for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it captures that there are so many ways to tell your child's story. And sometimes we feel pressure as the parent, especially if you're a parent whose child might not be able to represent themselves through their words. We feel a pressure to tell their story. And it's important to acknowledge that there's an opportunity to do that in many different ways. One example is, as she says, in dress. My son was on the cutting edge, the early edge of when, crazy socks became popular. And everyone in my family started wearing them as a way to convey Benjamin and also to convey our rare disease experience. So we used words, clothing to tell our stories. Stephanie illustrated how art can be such an impactful form and way to tell your story. But what I really love about this quote is that end part that is in bold here, which is what Daniel spoke about, the why we tell our stories. We tell our stories because for our children, we're living out their wisdom and their love. And this is really true. We tell stories to heal ourselves, to help others. We share stories to create a common experience or generate more understanding, to help ourselves feel seen and heard. But mostly the real reasons that we tell stories are to make meaning out of a world that often feels meaningless and without reason, and to bring forward, in our case, with children who may not be able or may not be ready to convey their wisdom and love, to get that out into the greater world. Next slide, Daniel. So Courageous Parents Network is actually a living example of the human being's natural instinct to create a narrative framework to promote healing and for others to find a path forward. At CPN, we've done research, so we know that parents feel more empowered and less alone when they watch a family video or read one of our blogs. Equally and more importantly, and probably why a lot of you are here today, we hear from parents all the time who write for us or offer a video interview about how the process of sharing their story was an antidote for their helplessness. I think Daniel could speak to that a little bit over his time blogging for us, and I can tell you more about that if people are interested at the end. But we also hear that it's a way for them to better understand themselves, and for many parents, it is a way to create a legacy for their child. Myra Sachs, who happens to be on CPN's board, and in August will be doing a really stellar bereavement workshop with Global Genes, actually wrote this once about her Caring Bridge site, and I think it again sort of grounds what we're here to talk about today. She wrote, "By anchoring our weeks in reflections, fears, pain, and gratitude, we released so much of Javi into the world." Her daughter Javi had Tay-Sachs and obviously never even had the capacity to speak, dying under the age of 2, I believe. Next slide, Daniel. I also wanted to share this quote from Amy, partially because it offers a different perspective. Her daughter Lauren had pediatric cancer, but also to again acknowledge that pressure that as parents, we are witnesses to so much. Not only to what our impacted or child with a rare disease is going through, but often we're witnesses to the impact that it has on the other members of the family. And here Amy talks about also the privilege of bearing witness to what her healthy children were going through as they were experiencing an ill sibling. And so I wanted to include this because becoming a witness is a weighty responsibility. And sometimes the weight of that can be a real barrier to being able to bring it forward, especially through writing, I think. But it also, being a witness also provides so much fodder and food for writing, right? So next slide, Daniel. I wanted to go pretty quickly to tips because honestly, when I come to webinars, I like to what can I walk away with? I want to hear the things that are going to help me better craft what I'm going to do. And so I tried to think of some tips that would help you to express the voice of your child in a clearer fashion. So the first is something that we all know. Our children aren't linear. And the best stories that we can write and tell are the ones that represent this. Your child is so much more than a series of events. And yet, often, too often, to be honest with you, we tend to write our stories in those series of events. We start at the beginning and we work our way all the way through the end. That doesn't necessarily make a compelling story. It may be an activity that you need to go through to identify the jewels and gems of your child's life, because representing their voice really means pulling those out and showing them to the rest of the world. So thinking about things like, what lessons has my child taught me? Where have the aha moments been? Good ones or bad ones? It doesn't matter, but where are they? And what can I say about them? And this one was always really big for me. Where and when do you see some unique quality in your child that fills your heart? Starting a list of just making those times and those qualities can be a great place to start your writing and to think about moving your child's voice forward and out into the world. And the reason why that works is because it's those times that are going to move and motivate your reader. And it's my guess that when you start writing about those moments, this is when your reader's going to best see your child, because you're going to describe them in that way that you know deep in your heart. So my second tip is have confidence that you are an expert in your child. We practice this all the time with our children, with our doctors, with our teachers, in so many sort of academic settings. But too often I find at Courageous Parents Network, we shy away from it in our writing because it's hard. We spend a lot of time interpreting. My son couldn't speak, so I had to read his facial expressions, his sounds, and his body language, but sort of translating that into the written word was very hard. And I know as a parent, sometimes I felt especially stymied by this pressure to accurately represent him. I would describe him and it either felt too cliche or worse. Sometimes it felt like an over-representation or exaggeration. And what I really wanted to get on to was that nugget of truth. I think for me, it was hard because at 3, Ben could tell me his likes and dislikes. So he could express an emotion that I could then transfer into words. But by 10, his words were gone, and I had to sort of glean who he was now from the things I knew about him in the past. And it's hard to do that authentically. I wanted to try to give you an example. When Ben was very young, I would describe him as a boy's boy, that truck-loving, ball-loving kind of kid, because he really was. And people understood that. They could see the image, and honestly, they could see a photo of him at the time doing those things. But when he was wheelchair bound and he could no longer play with balls and trucks, finding the right words to sort of convey that personality trait that I thought was still deep within him, because I could see it sometimes in his facial expression or what he laughed at when he was watching a video, it became harder to write about it. And it sort of evolved. One time I remember writing about him and describing as a kid who would dip his steak in his mashed potatoes. And then later, much later, as a boy who wears pink mustache socks under his AFOs with confidence. So knowing how to describe your child, and certainly over time, it helps to remember that you're an expert in your child. My next tip is very simple. It's one you probably already all know. Show, don't tell. It goes back to sort of not describing your story in the linear fashion or in order of events. But what I really wanted to say about this tip is that showing will make your story feel genuine. And when your story feels genuine, you will feel like you accurately represented your child. And the reason why showing helps your story be genuine is because it's often then when you show that emotions come out. And Stephanie touched on this a little bit earlier, but emotions really make storytelling, either through art or any other medium, come alive. And they attach the reader to your story. And by extension, what you're doing then is attaching that reader to your child. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish when we're representing our child's voice. This one is hard, and it's the one that when I'm doing work with my bloggers and residents, we often bump heads about most often. And this tip is to find the commonalities while illuminating the differences. So the real truth of this, if you were to talk to storytelling advocates, is that the most effective stories point to some sort of positive that the reader can hold on to. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to sanitize your experience or always be upbeat about what's happening, but finding a common ground, the ground that somebody sometimes that has a rare disease, you need to hit on that one, but a lot of times you need to hit on the one that's the common ground that everyone shares, will create an emotional loyalty from your reader. And I want to give you an example of this. One of the most effective storytelling pieces I wrote, fundraising, I wrote it for fundraising, and that's a really good, important distinction, was a time that I wrote about Ben losing his ability to walk. I wrote a story about my husband and I standing in the kitchen, sort of passing Ben back and forth between us as he walked, because at this point, he only ever walked as we were holding him or with a trainer or something supporting him. And we were taking this chance to let him walk independently. And as we were doing it, we were slowly backing up. So the distance between my husband and I were getting greater and greater and greater. And it dawned on me during this, that when this was happening and when I wrote about was that this was the same thing I did when Ben was 15 months old and first learning to walk, right? We all as parents have done that task with our children somewhere along the path. And so I talked about this universal goal of wanting to parent, about parenting, always wanting to push your child to be the best that they can be. And I'll just read you a little piece of it because I think that'll convey it better than I seem to be managing doing at the moment. I wrote, with that tiny new life in your arms and hope in your heart, you know your singular purpose is to challenge and guide them, to encourage them to reach beyond their limitations, defeat their obstacles, and become all that they are capable of being. That night in my kitchen, that was exactly what I was doing for Ben. His age was older, the expectations much different, but the goal was intrinsically the same. So drawing that parallel back to the common parenting experience created a bond with my readers.
Hello, hair
And-
lady.
And yet, it also illustrated how very different my parenting experience was. And that contrast helped them see Ben, the Ben that was in front of me. And it also helped them see why they needed to donate, which was the purpose of where this particular piece went. So try to find commonalities when you can, because I think it's a great way to accurately represent your child. Your voices will mingle. So, right, sometimes you can write a piece that is really coming out of you and it's about your parenting experience. And sometimes you're going to write a piece that's really about your child. And knowing which one can be the star of the story before you start writing is sometimes a helpful tactic. Again, in advocacy writing, you can learn that the best stories are framed. That sort of a frame around a story is identifying what you want the reader to take away. If you think about it in terms of art and artwork, the frame doesn't distract from the picture. It's a complementary to the picture, but it guides oftentimes it can guide the viewer to what you want them to look at. Framing can also help you understand which voice is going to be the star of the story. I think this can be particularly important when the child themselves may be able to offer their own voice, or when they're beginning to be able to develop their own voice. If you create a framework or what you want the child to, or the reader to know, and share that with your child, together you can develop what that message is, and it can help you incorporate their voice into your voice. I used this tactic with my healthy children when I was writing stories, because as they got older, I needed to be more and more aware of how much the story I was telling about their brother Benjamin was actually shaping their experience. And so sometimes what I would do with my children, Noah and Isabel, is I would share the frame of my story, what I was intending the story to tell. And we would talk about that first and the ways that they were comfortable with me telling it. So framing can be a very helpful tool when you're trying to work out the voice. The last one I'm only going to talk briefly on, because I have this sneaky feeling that Mike is going to talk a little bit more about it. So I don't want to say a lot about it, but understanding who you're trying to reach and your goal for writing is really important. There are a lot of goals for writing. Sometimes they're very, very, very personal. Every time we tell a story, it's for a reason. But when you're sharing it publicly or to create understanding or change, that's a very specific form of storytelling that really relies on knowing your audience and knowing why you're writing that critical piece. At CPN, we get an opportunity and actually a privilege to read many, many, many stories. But I will be honest and tell you there are some stories that need to be kept to ourselves. They might create an internal meaning for us, but they're not written in a way that makes it an effective tool for other parents to learn from, or maybe even for you to actually get the feedback that you've been seeking by sharing your story publicly. If you think about the concept of your diary, not everything you write in your diary is going to make it out into the public. But knowing your audience and goal can help you identify what pieces to include, and it can sometimes help you identify what pieces of your child's voice you want to bring to the table. There are parts of Ben that I don't share in any stories because I want to keep them to myself. I need them, particularly now as a bereaved parent, for my own internal story. And the way I know not to share them is when I think about who my audience is for that particular part of my child's voice. So I'll turn it over to Mike now.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you,
Jennifer.
by the way.
Yeah. Mike Porath, if people don't know him already, is a former ABC journalist turned founder of The Mighty, which is probably the largest repository of blogs and articles on medical challenges and rare disease, in a subset of that being rare diseases in particular. So Mike, you can do a better self-introduction, I'm sure. Take it away.
Thank you, Daniel. When you were introducing all of us at the beginning and you said, I remember that first meeting you and I had at the Global Genes Conference. I did not realize it was back in 2015. Doesn't seem that long ago, but it's great to see all of you. I was scanning the names here. I know many of the folks that are here in our virtual audience today. So real quick background on me, as Daniel mentioned, I'm a journalist, or a former journalist. I'd worked at ABC News, NBC News, and the New York Times. And so in many ways, I was kind of a professional storyteller before getting into the, rare disease space. Like many of you, I found my way into here, kind of by accident. My wife and I have 4 kids. Our oldest, our daughter, Annabelle, has a rare disease called Dup15q syndrome. She was diagnosed when she was 2. She will turn 18 next month. So I've been part of the rare disease community for, a long time. And that's honestly the reason I created The Mighty, was to try to match my professional experience with something that I thought I became much more passionate about. And, when we talk about, I mentioned on the slide at the very top, like, we learn best through stories. I believe that, again, as a journalist, when you're trying to convey information, the best way to do it is through stories, because as human beings, it's the simplest way of how we learn and how we retain information and what, moves us emotionally. So I'm just a huge believer in stories, just in general. And the day that my daughter was diagnosed, after a year and a half of lots of doctor's visits and trying to get an answer as to what was going on, I went online and I ended up Googling, like you have all probably done, and found 6 stories written by parents of kids with the same syndrome that my daughter has. And this is before we had talked to anyone, literally the day that she got diagnosed. And through reading those stories, I was, one, scared because they talked about 100 seizures a day and what autism is really like and all of these different things. So they were scary, but they were really filled with some humor and joy. And that's the part that made me feel like if these other parents are able to cope with this or manage their way through it, or this was a life-changing thing that had happened hours ago to us, that I felt that my wife and I could do the same. And so really from that first day getting the diagnosis, stories became very important to me, and those 6 stories that I read were ultimately what I think of the first 6 mighty stories, in the sense that that's what was I got so much out of them. I remember thinking, I want to find these people. I want to take them out for a beer. I want to listen to, what they've been through, what they've learned, things like that. And that was really the idea behind the Mighty, is to create a network where stories would be the heart and center of it and allow for connection and, peer-to-peer relationships and all of those types of things. So that's, what got us into starting the Mighty. We have since now produced 60,000 stories. We have a lot in rare disease, but we cover a lot of other things. Mental health kind of blew up during COVID, and chronic illnesses and things like that. We have about 250,000 people on our website app or opening our emails each day. And so through all of, helping people put together their stories and sharing them and seeing what's worked and what hasn't and all that, I thought I would just share, kind of, our own experiences of seeing all of that. And I will say, just right off the bat, before I get into some of these bullet points, we all know how to tell stories. You do not need to be a professional in terms of, getting something out there. You do it every day, whether you're telling a kid a story or your spouse or a friend, and it may happen through text or a phone call or in person. We all understand stories and how to tell them. So I want to remove that barrier that some people feel like, I don't know how to do it. We all know how to, to do this. Is Jennifer and others have pointed out, rather than trying to tell an entire life story from beginning to end, you really want to find the moments, the meaning behind those moments. The key to stories just in general is drama. You go watch a film, you don't see it from birth to death, and everything happens in chronological order. The highs and the lows and the meaning behind those are what really pull people in and help convey what you want to convey. And then the last part is, we've done actually a lot of work with academic institutions to be able to show that the stories themselves can have very positive health outcomes for other people. We did a great research project with Harvard University, and we were able to show that that we were able to raise scores or levels of social connectedness by people reading stories from peers, and people became more optimistic. And so when you do tell your story, know that you're helping people feel more socially connected, and you're making them feel more optimistic. That's we got research to back it up. And although it was unique to the Mighty, I would say for any of you telling those stories, that's what the impact is very real in terms of what you're doing. So now, just in terms of, before you sit down to figure out what story you're going to tell and how you're going to do it, I think it's really important to ask a couple key questions. And so the first is, what are you trying to achieve with your story? And I'll just give you a few examples. Those first 6 stories that I read the day my daughter was diagnosed, that was around connection. It was really a matter of making me feel that I'm not alone out there, that there are other people that are going, through all of these things. And so for a lot of people, the stories that they're trying to tell, if it's, the audiences for, other parents, let's say of children with rare diseases, the particular rare disease, let's say your child may have, things like that. connecting with them may be the goal of, that story. It could be advocacy efforts. It could be, that you're looking for donors out there, that you're trying to figure out how do you tell a story in a way that will get someone to donate $50 or $100, or a corporation to put in tens of thousands of dollars, or the NIH to give you a $250,000 grant, or which is going to shape what you say and how you say it maybe a little differently. Education, you want to educate people about a particular rare disease, and that may, again, that goal is going to be slightly different than some of the others. And most stories, to be honest, have a range of these. It might be 60% one and 20% the other. Not that you have to really figure that out exactly, but it's still good to really know, what are you trying to achieve by telling the story that you're setting out to do. And then a second question is who you're trying to reach. And again, I mentioned, other parents or peers, donors. We've had a program where we work with medical students in the rare disease space, where we're trying to help them better understand how to diagnose someone with a rare disease, to how to think that this could be a rare disease. That's going to be one that there's a lot more information than emotion involved in terms of helping people. It's really stories about how my child, got the diagnosis that they did, what were all the misdiagnoses along the way, things like that. It could be, you're trying to impact policy, and you get 10 minutes with a congressman or something like that. And so what you're trying to achieve and then who you're trying to reach are really the two, I think, most important questions when you sit down to, figure out what story you're going to tell. And then the last is, what are the best formats and platforms, for your story? And so most of what's on the Mighty are stories that are text. So these are written, they can be 200 words, they could be 2,000 words. What are there visuals that you're going to use? Visuals have a ton of emotion packed into them, both good and bad. And so to think through, if you put together photos that are all, happy faces, yeah, is that really the life that we all live? With rare disease, probably not. At the same time, you don't want to have all sad faces or all the hardest moments too. So how do you mix those in? Podcasts, videos, I do a lot of, live events. So like, what is the format that you're going to put this story together in, and then the platform. So is it designed to be shared across social media? Is it designed to be shared by partners? Are you trying to get, rank high in Google? There's all kinds of different, ways to kind of get your story out there. So, but the first two questions help answer the third question, which is, again, what format, what platforms, and putting it out there. And then, as Jennifer pointed out, choosing the right moments to highlight in your story. She was, bringing up examples. I quickly looked up the very first story I wrote on the Mighty, which was why we created the Mighty. I had a paragraph that so many people ended up, it really resonated with, and I'll just read it quick. It's like 2 sentences, because this is kind of at the heart of what we're trying to accomplish. And so as explaining our own, our daughter with our rare disease and all that, I said, our journey has been far different than we expected. Over time, life's colors got brighter, deeper, and richer. Our highs are higher, our lows are lower, and we're often bowled over by those little moments packed with beauty and meaning. It's a good way to live. And what we were trying to do is flip the idea of, disease or disability being all negative. And that's why we ended up calling the community the Mighty, is because, it was more about the strength and the joy and the, we don't dismiss all of the hard stuff with it, but it's kind of an attitude that you take, along the way. And when I say the highs are higher and the lows are lower, I know my wife and I really feel like that since our daughter entered our lives, and all of the issues we deal with her, those highs, I just to give you one example, a story I often tell is when we were trying to teach her, she didn't speak, she does now, but in the early years she did not. And so we were trying to teach her signs, and after 6 months to a year of trying to teach her signs every day, she finally signed more, which is, putting your fingers together like that, when she was having a bowl of oranges. And my wife and I practically tackled each other trying to race to the kitchen to peel her another orange to show her that we, understood her. That was such a joyful moment that we may not have had with, one of our boys that are neurotypical and and all that. And then the lows, I don't need to give you a lot of examples. I think if you're in the rare disease community, you do have a lot of lows in your life, and it's important to share those moments as well. And so, but it's really finding those right moments as you think about your own journey that you've been on, and what you want to share. And as you think through that, then determine that balance of emotion and information for your story. I like to add, bits of humor here and there too. And that's going to depend on the audience as well. If I were getting in front of a congressman right now and trying to impact, policy, what I would say would probably have, the balance of that would be a little bit more on the information side than the emotion side. When I was the keynote speaker for the community that I'm a part of, Duke 15Q Alliance, 500 families, all with a child with the same rare disease as my daughter, and I get an hour's worth of time, that the stories I tell and how I tell them are going to be quite different, and there's going to be a lot more emotion in there because I know it's going to resonate with families that are going through the same exact things that my wife and I are with ours. So in some of these bullet points, I think I meant to delete, they repeat themselves. But again, finding that balance, I think, is, very important, for all those things. So again, I really encourage people to sit down and really be intentional when you think about what story you want to tell, how you want to tell it. The Mighty is one of many platforms, that you can, share your own personal story on. I would love to, I want to make sure, Daniel, that we have enough time for questions. So I'll stop there. I'm Mike at themighty.com if anyone wants to, reach out to me, but I want to make sure there's room for, questions from the audience. So I'll stop.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Yes, I'm going to rush through a couple of slides so that we can get right to the questions. We can certainly make the slides available and you can read them at your leisure, but these are a few ideas that I've addressed before. But one point, if you're on a podcast, know that almost or any interview, if you're being interviewed, they tend to make their last question, is there anything I forgot to ask you? You should be prepared for that question. That's your chance to talk about whatever was most important to you if it didn't come up already. I encourage you to screen grab any of these next few slides if you feel like it, but we'll also send them out. Resources from Global Genes, I won't read them all, but there's a lot there to guide you if you're looking to tell your story. Some resources from Courageous Parents Network, and most of them centered on storytelling, writing your story, and resources from EveryLife, a lot of them around the Rare Artist Program, but they recently did a great webinar in June that covered blogs, podcasts, and being interviewed for video, like television or film. Now, questions, fire away. Anyone, you can unmute yourself and jump right in, or if it's in the chat, I'll try to read those. Yes, we will send these links, resources. We will make the slide deck available.
Yeah, Daniel, can you get rid of the slide deck so we can see more people?
Good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, now we can see faces better. Any questions? Let's see. Nobody's gonna ask a question, huh?
Hi.
Hi, Amber.
Hi, I'm Amber. I meant to put my last name. I'm sorry, Amber Lackey. And I have neuromyelitis optica as well as sarcoidosis. I was wondering, I have already done like a few things as far as telling my story is concerned, but I'm relatively new. And I wanted to know, what is really the difference between advocacy and just really telling your story? Is it the same thing? I'm really trying to get well, I guess if there's a clear definition of that. And thank you. That was it.
I'll tackle it a little bit. That I would say all advocacy requires some storytelling, but if you're not targeted, your storytelling might not get you to the advocacy you're thinking of. And there are many different kinds of advocacy. And Stephanie at EveryLife, of course, is very concerned with legislative advocacy, and storytelling relates there. So maybe you want to jump in.
Absolutely. Amber, thank you for that question. We have had rare artists with the same condition as you, so appreciate you sharing that. From my point of view, yes, everybody has a story and they share that. I think one of the things that's really important with our organization and advocacy is how can you use your story to make a difference? Jennifer made a really good point of like when you join webinars and people are talking and share what you can do. But Jennifer had exact tips on the screen. So you use your story, but how can you use your story to make a difference? And that's really what advocacy is. And that's how that ties in. So think about it if you are in an elevator with somebody, a key stakeholder, whether that's a legislator or even your doctor. How can you tell your story? But what's something that you want to get out of telling that story? What's something that is a tangible change that could happen when you're in that elevator, when you're giving that elevator pitch to make a difference, whether that is supporting an ask, letting them know like you're having difficulty with access to medication, you're having difficulty with getting out of state approvals for Medicaid, whatever it may be. I hope that helps a little bit. We also have advocacy toolkits on our website as well. I could drop that in the chat and offer monthly webinars for our, we call it rare disease legislative advocates, to make sure that you have those tools to be able to tie in your story and also to tie in with how you can use your story to elevate and make a difference. But I think what's really important to remember, especially Amber, you've mentioned just starting out, you are the expert in your own story. As you get more and more involved, you may hear about policies, you may hear about ways that you can make a difference, ways that you can make a change. And some people tend to get scared by that and they say, oh, I'm not the expert in that. I don't know how to talk about that. Yes, you do. You absolutely do. You absolutely own your story. You own every part of your experience. And that's what's really most powerful. So please make sure that you remember that and own that. And your story is what is number one most valuable.
Yeah, I would add to that, Stephanie, at CPN, we talk about advocacy as advocacy with a big A and advocacy with a little a. And most of us do advocacy with a little a all the time, with our doctors, with our teachers, with other people in the community. Advocacy with a big A is very distinct. It's when you're going to have an article in the paper or go amongst a legislature or maybe talk to a representative of a biotech company or represent your disease community. So understanding your audience is about understanding which kind of advocacy you're actually doing, and what story is going to be necessary to be effective in that particular environment.
Can I
Great.
add one thing?
Yes,
I'm
please.
Crystal. I have kidney disease, and I recently was told by the American Kidney Fund at one of their conferences that anytime you tell your story, you're advocating. And so it's not always, like a big production as we think. I didn't realize that. For me personally, I was diagnosed with kidney disease at age 14, and I went into kidney failure as a result of giving birth to my son. And I started, speaking about everything that was happening to me on social media. And that was a form of advocacy that I didn't even, I didn't realize I unintentionally became like an influencer for kidney disease. So I would say anytime that you speak about the disease, as advocacy, because awareness is a form of advocacy as well. So speaking about, the illness that you have, sharing your journey, you're bringing awareness to the disease and teaching someone something about the illness that they may have never known.
Great. Thank you,
Can
Crystal.
Daniel, just highlight a couple questions that were in the chat and kind of my responses to them, because I'm kind of in that same boat. I know we're low on time. There was a couple people who mentioned kind of wanting to be able to share their story and participate in storytelling, even if they don't personally have a connection with a rare disease, and that they themselves don't have a rare disease and an immediate family member doesn't have a rare disease. But you know, that's kind of where I am. I've been in the rare disease space for 10 years. And I just kind of like happened to fall into it after college through an internship. And I've just continued to work in this space for a variety of different reasons. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a personal connection with rare disease. Like I do through the individuals that I've met in the space, through the patients that I've supported and advocated for, and you know, helped them share their story. And so I think like you still have of value in your story and your connection to rare disease through that. And to answer the question that Kate had, which was about how to like inspire people in your community, I think you can just start by asking questions. You can just ask them about themselves, ask them about their journey, ask them about their challenges and their wins and their moments, and that gets you the story right there. And then you can kind of use that to then spread the word and like encourage them to talk to others about it. So that's kind of, you know, just because you yourself don't have a personal story to share about your own struggles, you can still share stories in your advocacy journey.
Yeah, and Rachel, just to jump on that, I think it's a really important point is when we think about the impact of advocacy, of telling stories, the idea is that you're really building community. You're getting all of these other people invested in what you're going through or what you're, you know, kind of dealing with. And when you ask questions, when you open it up, that's what gets people more invested. Is you've given them room now to tell their story. You've given them, you know, a little bit more of that why behind why they may want to help or do whatever. And so even though we think of storytellings as we're the ones telling, when you ask and you get other people to start sharing, that, you know, exponentially drives the impact that you ultimately want to have.
Yeah, right. You don't
Yeah.
have to necessarily be the center of the
Right.
story. It can be someone else as the center. And also, I mean, what is advocacy for, right? Advocacy is, we all do advocacy to raise awareness for rare diseases so that those outside of the rare disease community, like myself, are more aware of rare disease and working toward to, you know, to make it easier for those living with rare conditions to be able to live their lives, right? And so you want more, you want to advocate so that there are more people in, you know, their broader sphere of humanity that are rare aware. That's kind of the whole point, right?
Yeah, thank you. I want to get to a question Vanessa asked in the chat, which is, how do you make a balance in the story without worrying a parent about how severe a condition can be and still make donors interested enough to want to help? And that is a tricky balance. Mike mentioned we tell these stories to be not all the good news and not all the bad news, but a blend. And the first film I made was in part on Menkes disease, which my son had, was in part because the only information out there was the bad news of the WebMD journals and the dire prognosis. And I thought, people don't realize, I didn't realize, you're going to have a life, a full life. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. So I don't know that I would hide from the hard parts, but I would make sure you include the joys as you can. And many of our diseases are on a spectrum. And I think that can create a little bit of comfort for the new person, the new parent coming, that whether it's slightly self-delusional or not, you can imagine maybe I'm on the lower end of spectrums until you're more up to speed to the reality you're facing. And maybe you're on the higher end of severe spectrums, symptoms on the spectrum. But not everyone's experience is going to be the same. Yes, we don't want to scare people off, but for me, that's part of the answer. And I don't know if anyone else has thoughts along those lines.
Yeah, and Dan, I'll jump in, and because I think what you're saying, and talking about some of the highs and lows and what to share and what to not is, you do want to be vulnerable. I think that the most effective stories have that vulnerability in there. You don't necessarily want to be like, again, I wouldn't get up and tell a story that was 100% bad. How hard is this? It's hard to get someone invested in that because you want to show that there is hope, or here's a path towards something, or, you know, humanize it in some way. But at the same time, I don't think it's right to stand up and just talk about all of this amazing positive stuff, when the reality is a lot of people living with whatever that rare disease may be, it's not all positive. We know that. And so that vulnerability is really an expression of honesty, and people connect with that. And so the balance of that all depends on, again, what you're trying to achieve, who you're trying to, who the audience is. But I think you need both, elements there to come across as, just genuine, and you're going to win more people over if you're able to do that.
I'll add to that a couple points. Number one being, and I know I mentioned it when I was talking, but I know I mentioned about like the medical jargon and whatnot, the terms that we are also used to. But take a step back when you are telling your story. Almost pretend like you're talking to a kindergartner of what is something that a kindergartner would be able to use when you're telling your story. So my disease, for example, it's called idiopathic intracranial hypertension. I have too much cerebrospinal fluid around my brain. But the way I tell it is that it's like a balloon that's blowing up and there's too much air in it and there's nowhere for the air to go. So if you use those terms as a way to be able to, make a metaphor, it's a lot easier to understand. Another thing that I highly recommend doing is when you're telling your story, and Mike and Daniel really pointed it out, that it's not all rainbows and butterflies, and certainly don't make it out to be rainbows and butterflies, but focus on a key part of your journey. What is a story? What is an aspect that you really struggled with? What is something that is really like going to tug on people's heartstrings, almost, for lack of a better term, that you can be able to say, this is what happened to me. And if you think you tell somebody that and they get the wow effect, that wow effect is really impactful, especially if you're trying to tell a story in a condensed period of time.
I'll just add, and Mike kind of said this, but I'll say it in a different way. Sometimes it is the sort of less than positive or negative things that we experience that actually create a moment of clarity for us. And if you can convey the sort of ugly along with the clarity, you've balanced what you're giving them. You're offering them the hard parts, but at the same time offering them the good that comes with it. So sometimes you have to literally show them where the balance is. You can't just sort of expect them to glean it from you. You might actually have to literally point it out.
This has been great. Obviously, anyone looking at the clock knows we've gone a little bit over. Maybe if there's one more question, we could get to it. If not, we can certainly wrap up and share the recording and the slides. Jade has just asked, do you have any suggestions for handling a more macro storytelling that your rare disease is complicating, which is micro, when you have to communicate your story? So Jade, I don't know if you want to jump on audio and clarify that a little bit. You're saying the rare disease is just a small part of maybe the bigger challenges you're facing? Hi, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the macro situation, meaning if you're trying to share your story and you're trying to really talk about what's larger that might be happening, where it's happening to the larger rare disease community, but trying to communicate a story from that perspective, where your story is going to be part of it and also maybe others as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, without knowing a whole lot more, I would say start with the micro because it's personal and it's, your individual case, and then, kind of transition into and you can keep that really short. If you're writing it, that could be a paragraph, it could be 2, and then opening it up to the broader challenge that maybe your community faces or something like that. But people respond to the personal, right? It's who we are as humans. And so starting there, I think is it would be my suggestion.
Using the way of framing your story, what is the intent that you want somebody to take away? What is the thing you want them to take away? Can help you move from the micro to the macro, because it's usually, the intent is usually some macro message that you want, and especially in big A advocacy. So that can also help you. Like if I'm going to do a presentation to physicians, which we do a lot at CPN, I have to identify the learning objectives. In some ways, that forces me to identify what I want the speech or how I want the story to go.
Great. Well,
Thank
thank you to Jennifer and Mike and Stephanie, and to all of you, especially those of you who asked questions. Thanks for joining this. I hope people found some good takeaways. You can probably contact any of us with more questions, and I'll be sharing the resources, which may lead to other questions, but there's a lot to be had from any of the organizations represented here today on this. So thank you all. And there's always Global Genes Summit coming up in September, Week in Rare, Health Equity Forum, Rare Advocacy Summit. You can, we actually have a rare storytelling workshop there too. So thanks again for joining. We'll be in touch with more.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.